Hi, I'm Steve Mentz, professor of English at St. John's University in New York City. My talk for the Globe for Globe program is called A Naughty Night to Swim In, Rough Water Swimming in Shakespeare and the Anthropocene. I want to start with a personal story. Quite a few years ago, in the summer of 1985, just before I went to college, I swam out too far on a rough sea. A hurricane had passed offshore the day before, and the ocean was still roiling on the coast of New Jersey that day. I was young and a strong swimmer, and I couldn't resist. Most of the images that I'll show on these slides are from that same beach, though not from that day or even from that decade. Back to 1985. The undertow is a tricky beast, especially after a significant storm. I didn't notice how fast the froth was siphoning me offshore. I just went with the waves until I turned and saw how far I was from the beach. It was a long, hard, asymmetrical swim back in. I made it, which is why I can talk to you today, 40 years later. I knew enough not to fight the surf. I tried to match myself to its flow and force, not losing too much ground when a wave sucked me out, but then clawing forward to gain when I could. The waves were too big to body surf, at least for me, and I spent most of my time just ducking under. I don't know how long it took me to swim in, but it felt like a long time. I ended up face down on my belly, crawling out of the white water. Today, as I embark on yet another back-to-school September, I think about that moment, the power of the water, the weakness of my limbs, the overwhelming abstraction of wondering if I could get my feet back to solid ground. Today, we live in a world of more frequent and more destructive storms than those of the late 20th century. We would be well advised to think about how we will go about swimming in these rough waters. That memory and its lingering environmental fear leads me to King Lear. At the center of this play, the mad king and his companions seek shelter from the storm in a bare hovel that does not quite keep the rain out. There the king encounters poor Tom, the bedlam beggar, who warns of rising water. Fathom and half, poor Tom. A few lines later, the fool cautions his master in the phrase I've highlighted in my title. Prithee, nuncle, be contented, 'tis a naughty night to swim in. Lear's rough water swimming bears a meaningful relationship to my post-hurricane swim in 1985. Both of our bodies immersed themselves in alien forces we could not directly oppose. We both survived these encounters, but they unsettled us and showed us what it's like to live in a hostile environment. As a Shakespeare professor and eco-critic, I've been wrestling with Lear and the Storm for decades. I believe these scenes of encounter with elemental forces, which do not advance the play's plot in any direct way, comprise an essential parable for our Anthropocene present and our near future. Today I'll unpack how these visions of Lear and my teenage self swimming in rough water might help us endure the rising waters of our present day. Literary representations of hostile environments, including shipwreck narratives from Homer to the film Titanic, have become increasingly topical in the Anthropocene. The flooded hovel in King Lear puts a spotlight on the experiential stakes of water out of place. My hope today is to move from textual analysis to environmental practice. These scenes present a visceral image of human vulnerability inside unstable nature. They help us articulate a poetics of rough water swimming that may become especially urgent during our own storm-tossed era. The Fool's warning underlines the play's evacuation of familiar supportive relations between humans and our non-human environment. The practice the Fool insists Lear should avoid, swimming, becomes a provisional method for survival and locomotion in a hostile environment. Previously, I have argued that Lear's storm scenes represent what I call, borrowing a term from the cultural critic Andrew Ross, strange weather. To be strange in this sense means to estrange and alienate. It's not that Anthropocene storms hate us. Thinking that storms voice human emotions is Lear's anthropocentric error. But in their monumental lack of concern, storms redraw the boundaries between self and world. The hostility of wind and rain contains nothing, naught. For the storm to be naughty means that it expresses nothingness as elemental force. Neither receptive to nor reflective of human desires, the flooded world alienates experience. In a world of wetness, these scenes cast in doubt the productive value of seeing ourselves in nature. As the cold-soaked king stands at the hovel door, he debates his inner and outer storms in language that captures the threat of Anthropocene floodwaters. Whatever higher order the storm may or may not follow, Lear's body feels alien to it. In describing the storm, the king pinpoints a crisis of borders. The storm, he says, invades us to the skin. This half-line defines the experience of swimming in the floodwaters of this play. The language exposes the threat of water, which directly touches the weak body. This phrase also shows the insufficiency of conceptual paradigms like early modern providentialism or even modern ecological science, which each describe in their different ways harmonious or perhaps just legible relationships between humanity and nature. The storm's water penetrates exactly up to the line of separation between body and nature, invading precisely to the skin, neither more nor less. Strange weather is something you cannot ignore because it is not only external, and cannot incorporate because it is not entirely internal either. Rather, water marks the boundary itself, the shifting and vulnerable line between self and world. Recalling but also recasting early modern ideas about the porousness of the body, Lear imagines his skin as partially transgressible barrier. Water insinuates itself across this and all boundaries. Since we are, in Astrida Nemanis's helpful phrase, all bodies of water, whether we are human beings, flooded hovels, or ocean basins, water is the physical element that spans and obviates the supposed separation of human from world. The wet world of the storm conjures the wet matrix inside Lear's body, as well as the dissolving social fabric of his kingdom. The old man's body has no direct response to wetness, but to the extent that he, like teenage me at the Jersey Shore, moves his arms and legs, he propels himself through and across his environment. The king may be a poor swimmer, and I may have been out of my depth, but neither one of us drowned. The hovel and the beach appeared as much lifebuoy as shelter. In a longer talk, I would sketch a history of swimming as human practice, from antiquity to the present, with attention to how global maritime travel during the early modern period brought the poor swimmers of Northern Europe in touch with aquatic cultures in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. To reimagine King Lear as rough water swimmer slightly deflates the rage that he describes as the moral heart of the storm. Listening less to what Lear says and instead observing what he does, how his body survives immersion, might enable us to recast the storm into an environment that is hostile, but also a place in which human bodies can, through practice and exertion, survive, at least for a while. These scenes stage an alienated human body in an uncaring universe. My hope of reconceiving the Mad King as almost spent swimmer aims to reimagine the boundary between storm and skin, not just as the site of vulnerability, but also as a tool for resilience. Trapped within tragedy, Lear cannot swim beyond his failures or outswim his bloody-minded daughters. But the vision of the rough water swimmer, perhaps, can model a different relationship between wet and dry environments and bodies. Thank you.